Hello, and welcome to another lesson in harmony. Today we're going to talk about secondary seventh or secondary diminished chords. Secondary diminished, you say? I bet there's a connection between those and secondary dominance. And I will respond, yes, you are entirely correct, but you also have a really annoying way of speaking and should never do that again. So, what is this connection? Well, it's just the idea that you're taking chords from other key signatures, other scales, and having them function in a way that kind of morphs into the scale that you're currently in. So, before we had a 5 of 5 chord, which was a D major chord going to G. Now we will have a F sharp diminished chord, F sharp AC, going to G. Now, if I didn't already make it clear, that's one of the ways to resolve these, is just move it up a half step. Just like B diminished resolves to C, F sharp diminished will resolve to G. Now the other way is, once again, if you look at what we already know, B diminished can go to G because then it just sounds like a G7 chord. An F sharp diminished can go down a third to a D dominant chord, a 5 of 5 chord. So you can go 7 of 5, 5 of 5, and then to the 5, and obviously this also works for other scale degrees. You can be going 7 of 6 to 5 of 6, and then to 6, or maybe you resolve it in that pseudo-deceptive way we were talking about before. So there is, however, one big difference, and before I go on to that, I will say you don't necessarily need to have a dominant chord follow if you go down a third. It's just generally what you see. But the other big difference between a secondary dominant and a secondary seventh is our secondary dominants tended to be built up on scale degrees that are diatonic. If you were in C, it's either built on C, D, E, A, or B. But with secondary sevenths, it's generally built on scale degrees that aren't diatonic. Say F sharp, which is very much not a diatonic note in the key of C. Now, the reason for this, once again, is because essentially what makes secondary dominance and secondary sevenths work is that leading tone. And the leading tone is generally not a diatonic note. Now, there are exceptions. You might have a 7 of 4. And if you were to have a 7 of 4, E, G, B flat, that would resolve to an F, and then obviously E is diatonic and F is diatonic. It's pretty much, with the exception of that B flat, all diatonic. But with most of the other notes, you're going from something like D to F sharp, or E to G sharp, or A to C sharp. Now you'll notice all of these are sharps. And usually they're either going to be sharps or natural. It'll be natural if you're in a flat key signature, and sharp if you're in a natural one. There's some exceptions to this. If you're in a sharp key signature already, it might be a double sharp. Once again, depends a little bit, but that's the basic thing you can kind of expect. Why is this? Why are we having it go up instead of saying, like, why do we have an F sharp instead of a G flat? Well, to go from F sharp to G, aside from being just the way the G scale is a very clear way to write. You go, okay, that's an F sharp and that's a G, and I can see they're on two different, parts of the staff. Very, very clear, close, but still very, very clear, whereas going from a G flat to a G is a little bit more complicated, especially if later on we're going to go back to that note. Then you're just trying to get a lot of accidentals. It's easier to make mistakes. It's just slightly easier on the reader. Not impossible for them to follow that, but a little bit easier if you're just having an F sharp to G rather than a G flat to G. Now what this means is sometimes you might be seeing things like B sharp or E sharp. And an example of that is if we're in the key of D and we have a 7 of 3, then we're going to have a 7th chord that's built on E sharp. It'll be E sharp, G sharp, B. Now, obviously no one really likes B sharp and E sharp because you're like, well, why can't I just have C and F? Well, once again, it just makes it a little bit easier to read for, the person who has to play it. Now, the one thing I will add is you can have a 7th chord built on your secondary 7th, and there are two types. We're only really going to talk about one today, and that's the half-diminished secondary. That's the half-diminished 7th chord, really. In this case, it's a half-diminished secondary 7th. Now, what it means to be half-diminished, well, you have a diminished chord, and then you put the minor 7 from the root note of your chord on top. So going back to our F sharp example, that would be an E, because E is a minor 7, a dominant 7 above F sharp. Just quickly mention what a fully diminished 7 is. It's when you have a diminished 7th chord above your root. In this case, that would be E flat. Now, those function a little bit differently, and we'll get into how that works next week. But your half diminished chords essentially work the same way that your secondary diminished do. In fact, there's no real difference to speak of. It just becomes a matter of, okay, how do I move this top voice in a way that is, not displeasing? But it's not that difficult because your tritone is coming from your 1st and your 5th rather than your 3rd and your 7th. And yeah, that's really everything that there is to say about secondary diminished and half diminished chords. We'll talk about fully diminished next week, and that's when we start getting into more of a romantic type sound, and in my opinion, a little bit more fun and weird, and that's even when even more options start opening up to us. Well, anyway, hope you're having a great week, and I hope you come back here soon. Bye-bye.